Hi, Chris here. Today's series of videos is all about decking. I hope you find them useful. Alternatively, you can also email us and we'll answer whatever questions we can. Right, decking areas that you may or may not require planning permission for. The general rule is that if your deck is elevated higher above the ground than 2 feet or 600 millimeters, then you would need to seek planning permission. It would also be advisable just to run it past your neighbours, because neighbours are very good at waiting until you've finished and then putting in an objection. So just to cover away from all the hassle, just double check with your local council. Other than that, there should be no other issues at all. But should we still be considering using decking with heavy grooves in it? Well, to be perfectly honest, no. But people still seem to think that decking has to have heavy grooves. The problem with the heavy grooves is that they hold all the dirt and the moisture and the water, and the reason this has come about and the reason why we have this in the UK, we're the only country that have heavy groove boards generally, is because going back to the Alan Titchmarsh ground force days, when they started introducing decking, they thought, let's introduce it as a non-slip decking where the water flows off the top of the board into the grooves and flows away. The reality is that all the dirt and the muck sits in the grooves, unless you want a lifetime of maintenance in sweeping it out. All that dirt collects in the grooves. That's then when the boards get wet, they deteriorate far quicker because of all the dirt trapped in it, and it soaks up all the moisture. Then that's what causes all the slipperiness. What you really should be doing is, if you insist on using groove boards, you need to turn them upside down. So instead of having this groove surface on the top, you turn the board upside down, and hopefully you'll have a smooth surface then on the underside, which then becomes your top face. Those grooves will help aerate the framework, so the framework doesn't get waterlogged where the water drips between the deck board and the frame. Therefore the framework will last far longer. Smooth boards can be easily cleaned, the water can flow off between the gaps, and the only reason that boards become slippery, or timber boards become slippery, or even composite boards for that fact, is because nobody bothers to clean them. Any horizontal surface, especially in the UK, needs to be kept clean. Otherwise, and that's the reason why you slip on it. You're slipping on the dirt. It has nothing to do with the surface of the board, and that applies to composite as well as wooden boards, wooden deck boards. So the priority really is that either if you insist on having grooves, you only have a small, shallow V groove board, so it's not deep enough to hold loads of dirt and muck, or you go for a completely smooth board. And the same situation applies with composite boards, because you have to also bear in mind that with composite boards, a lot of them have recycled plastic, which all sounds very fine for the environment, but when you introduce plastic into a product, it expands and contracts, so you don't get the same stability. There's so many choices of boards out there. You're spoiled for choice, but there's a lot of road boards out there, a lot of road material that really you shouldn't be considering as decking material. So you need to choose wisely. You need to think about what you want. In our situation, we always use you can either have UK grown larch as a deck board, or we go down the thermally modified route, so you have the stability and the durability, and that would include thermo pine softwood, or you'd have the thermo ash, which is a hardwood and it's very popular, or you'd have the thermo Iroko hardwood, which is also very popular. And there are also one or two composites that we would recommend as well. But as for the majority of cheap import decking products, they're really not worth considering, because you'll end up with more problems going forward. Okay, regarding deck board sizes, most of the deck boards, certainly on hardwoods, are going to be 20-21mm thick. In the softwoods, they average around 25-26mm thick. You can go thicker, up to 32 if you really want to, but primarily on the softwood. There's no need to go much thicker on the hardwoods than 21mm due to them being far more robust. In terms of board width, most people in this country always try and go for the widest board, but you need to think about the aesthetics with something like that. Generally speaking, you get a 140mm wide board, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be considering a 90mm wide board, so it looks a little bit like a ship's deck, or even alternate the widths to add some additional interest in it. Most composite boards are generally of the wide board, which is generally around 140mm or 176mm. But just think about the interest factor when you want to lay decking. and using a narrower board or even mixing the different widths, you're generally looking at either 90mm, a 117 wide, or a 140mm wide. They're the three sort of primary, the most popular widths, should we say, as far as decking boards go. Regarding profiles on decking boards, that's fairly simple. You would have raised edges, you wouldn't have hard sharp edges for obvious reasons. You'd have raised edges on all four corners. If you don't want to surface fix and you don't want to have the screws visible through the surface, then you can have it side grooved, which allows you to use the Invisifix clip, and that creates a 5mm gap between the boards. You should always have about a 5mm gap. The closer you make it, then depending on the species of timber, that could close up too much. If you have it too wide, then you run the risk of having pencils dropping down it and various other things. So if you work average around about a 5mm gap, as I say, you've got the options then of using the clip, or if you're quite happy to surface fix, then that's obviously what you would need to do. You would pre-drill if you're going to surface fix on hardwood. You can't just drive a screw through hardwood because the screw will break. You should always be using stainless steel screws, to be perfectly honest. They don't react to any of the timbers, and that's the preferred route. They're slightly more expensive than your standard painted screws, but it really depends on the species you're using. Certainly in the case of something like cedar, if you wanted a cedar deck, you always use stainless screws, because otherwise it will react, the tannins will react with the screw, and you'll end up with black staining on the deck board. I hope that question answers some of your fears or concerns that you may have, but by all means drop us an email if we haven't answered a specific question or an issue that you have, and we'll do what we can to help.